Have you got an old fruit tree at home that you want to rejuvenate and bring back into productive life? Today we're going to be looking at a nectarine tree that we've rejuvenated to bring back healthy and fruit-bearing foliage across the top. This tree behind me, 18 months ago, when we first came to this garden, had a long, lank trunk, had open, spreading branches across the top. The fruit was hard to reach, the birds were getting it all, and we had very little productivity out of that tree. So what we've done with this tree is we've cut it back and we've let it regrow. If we look into the middle of this trunk, you can see where we've cut it back and where it's regrown from. This is where we cut the main trunk with a pruning saw, and all this subsequent growth that's come from that point is the new growth that we're going to be training up to get this tree back into healthy vigour. Summer pruning is a technique we use to reduce the vigour of a fruit tree. When we prune in summer, we bring the vigour down. When we prune in the winter time, which is often what people think about when they prune their fruit trees, you actually increase the vigour and the growth of that tree. In this case, we had a already established root system, and when we chopped that top off, we got a massive flush of vigorous growth coming off the top of the tree. So our challenge here is to do a summer pruning job, bring the vigour down and get more fruit-bearing wood around the lower canopy of the tree, which is where we can pick and harvest from. Before you do any pruning in your garden, whether it be fruit trees or ornamentals or shrubs, you should always make sure that your tools are clean and sharp, especially with fruit trees, because bacterial cankers and fungal diseases can be spread by the tools that you use. In this case, use a sharpener for your secateurs, making sure that you're working away on the blade and keeping all surfaces that are in contact with the plant really clean and sharp. And also, get a bit of methylated spirits or a bit of diluted bleach and wipe across the blades before you go into any pruning job. If you prune a tree that's got a bacterial canker and don't clean your tools, and then you go and prune another tree, you'll have every chance of taking that disease from one tree to the next. So always best to make sure you're keeping good hygiene practices in the backyard. When you're pruning a fruit tree, it's important to know the fruiting pattern of the particular tree you're working with. Apples and pears fruit from permanent fruiting spurs. So every year they'll fruit from the same spot, so when you're pruning those, you prune back to that spur. With stone fruit, peaches and nectarines like this case, the fruit is born from new season's growth from the previous year. If we take a look at this branch here, all of this growth is from the current season. This is the growth that will bear the flowers and fruit for the following season. If we allowed the flowers to appear along this very end of the branch, the fruit would come through here and the branch would be heavily weighed down and would bounce around and get damaged by the wind. So what we want to do in this instance is we want to cut the tree back to a point where there's firm, well-balanced foliage that's going to hold the fruit in a firm position for next summer. Once you understand how the tree bears its fruit, there's a couple of other things we need to keep in mind when we're pruning this tree. We want to keep the structure of the canopy nice and open and keep the crossing over branches from rubbing on each other and affecting the way the tree grows. In this way, we're really taking out some of the top parts of the tree and opening out the middle parts of the tree. We can continue this all the way around the tree, and you'll see we'll get an open vase effect, taking out all the crossing over branches and giving us a tree that has got plenty of light coming in, which will ripen the fruit next year. Here's an example of a branch that I would remove because it's crossing over. This branch here, which is coming from the main stem, is coming out and crossing over through these branches here, and is not really going to be very productive. So what I would be inclined to do here is take this one back to the main stem and leave some of these more solid branches above it, which are going to fruit further out. So I'm just going around the tree, shortening back all this year's laterals, leaving some of the shorter ones because they'll be happy to bear their fruit as they harden up through the end of summer. I'm taking out some of these long branches that are coming from the middle of the tree, the crossing over branches. It's okay to sacrifice some of these branches because there's plenty of new growth on the end of these limbs. You should always prune to an outward facing bud. And if we look at this instance here, we want the tree to open up from the middle out. We don't want the tree to grow back in this direction, so we prune this side of the bud and produce the new laterals forcing their way out. And that gives us an open framework. Here I've opened up the middle of the tree. I've taken out a lot of these small branches that are right in the centre. This allows air to move around in here, no crowding. And a lot of that little branching wasn't going to produce fruit anyway. So it's a good idea to get rid of it, to open up the centre of the tree. So now I've finished pruning across the whole tree. The next step when I always prune a fruit tree is to stand back, have a look at the general shape of the tree, see if there are any parts that are a bit higher or lower. And I'm quite happy with the way that tree is structured. Now we've got an open habit, we've got the tree with a manageable canopy, and this tree will happily flower and fruit next springtime. Part of the reason of doing a summer pruning is, as I mentioned earlier, is to reduce the vigour of the tree. And the way this works is if I prune in the summertime, this time of the year, we're about at the start of February, the fruit's long since been picked, or would have been if it had fruited. What happens now after this prune is the tree will respond with some new growth for the end of the season before it goes into its winter dormancy. Those little shoots that come from that are much less vigorous than the shoots that would come after a winter pruning. So it puts its energy into a bit of growth in the late summer, and that actually reduces the vigour of the tree. So we get a nicely contained and manageable tree. This tree will flower and fruit off these young laterals next springtime, and then we'll be into a situation where we get into a more natural summer pruning cycle. Once the fruit is set and has started to develop, you can easily see where the fruit is and where the new fruit's coming from. At that point we can come in and give it a light pruning, and this is around about November, December in our climate, just to allow the light through to ripen the fruit. And then we let it go through to fruit, pick the fruit, and then after the fruit's all picked off we can do another prune like we've done here. And that's all the pruning we need to do. If we do that with this sort of tree, we don't do any of the winter pruning, which forces new growth, and we keep the tree well contained. So, if you want to rejuvenate an old nectarine tree, that's how you do it. Best of luck.